Touch. I'm Lucy Sondel. My guest today is David Rodich, and this is one of the many pictures that he has brought to share with us today.
Well, Lucy, this doesn't look much like the scene we just passed outside, but I think with a little detective work we can figure out where it is. I'm sure many people will recognize the area as the square with the old stone bandstand and the Civil War statue, which of course now is in the front of the cemetery. This photograph comes to us from George Witchey's album. He was an amateur photographer who went all around town and took hundreds and hundreds of photographs and captured a lot of the things that are not normally seen. By that I mean they weren't settings for great events, therefore we don't have any pictorial representations of them. I don't know who the gentleman is walking across in front of the statue. This dark object in front of him is a horse trough there.
I wondered if he was dragging a wagon behind him or something.
It almost looks like that, like a sled or a sleigh. The snow obscures a lot of the details in this picture, but it's not that hard to date because of knowing the basic time when Mr. Witchey took his photographs. Also, the fact that the soldier statue is in the park tells us it's after 1912. The fact that the bandstand is there means that it's after 1915. The presence of the horse trough and the style in which the man is dressed would put us probably in the late teens, maybe around 1917 or thereabouts. But it's just a scene in the downtown area on Broad Street looking east.
And things certainly have changed since then, haven't they, David? What are the changes that we're going to talk about today?
Well, we have some more scenes around town. If we go back a little further in time, now, unless you recognize this steeple that we've talked about before as being that of the Methodist Church on Main Street, just south of what is now Central School, you probably wouldn't be able to recognize this area at all because everything is snow-covered and the trees are all laden with ice, and you really can't see any of the buildings. This would be about, this area in the foreground would be in front of what is now Central School. At that time it would have been the Union School. It was probably taken about 1890 or thereabouts. I can't account for this large pile of stones in the foreground here. There you can see some of the steps leading up to houses over on the right-hand side going down Injector Hill. Mill Street would come into the picture from the right, and then it drops off abruptly going down Injector Hill with the Injector Company on the left and the Match Company on the right, though at this time probably neither company had begun.
Wow. You're sort of a detective in all this, too. So
well, and sometimes you have to get a little characters there to pull out of a picture. This is another picture looking east on Broad Street. Again, it's nothing spectacular, but it just shows some more of the downtown area during a snowstorm. This also would be after the turn of the century. You can probably recognize John Hanna's business block here on the right.
Yeah. Why don't you tell me I can?
Well, this would be what we would call the Laderack building. It's officially known as the Huntsberger block, where Bob Guthrie has his offices on the ground floor. The area east of John Hanna's building was a home, and then going east of that was a carriage factory, and east of that was the Copland House boarding house, and east of that, just in the corner of the picture, and you really can't make it out unless you look very closely, was Dr. Detweiler's mansion on the corner of Broad and South Lyman Street, where the Marathon Station is now.
Wow. Wish we'd get this much snow, you know. I like to ski, and there's not been this much snow.
No, we've really been kind of slighted.
In a long time.
As long as I don't have to get out in it, I like the snow, or wish I'd shovel it. Since so many of the pictures we use, nearly all of them, come to us through the work of Captain T.D. Woolbaugh, who we've talked about before as being the premier photographer of Wadsworth for over 60 years, councilman, mayor, public official, church official, one of the most respected men in town. And this is an unusual picture because the captain is in it. And he is standing in front of his home, which is now Hartman Studio on the corner of High Street and Boyer. You can just make out on the left-hand side the front porch of the First Christian Church, or Disciple Church as it was known then. You can see a pump in the front lawn. And as I say, it's an unusual picture because he's taken it home. He was a hard worker. He'd rise early. He worked between 12 and 18 hours a day till he was over 80 years old. One morning in the fall, he was preparing his home for the winter, putting up the storm windows, doing that type of thing. And he was cleaning out the coal house. And he was hanging up the lawnmower on the wall, and he slipped. He lost his footing. He slipped, fell backwards, hit his head, and was knocked unconscious. Well, by the time he recovered and finished the task of putting up the lawnmower and got to work. It was almost 9 o'clock, and his day was ruined, and he was not a happy man. So this is an unusual picture to see him standing instead of being behind the camera.
Absolutely. I wonder who took that picture of him.
I don't actually know. I might suggest Earl Days. It's on the mountings that were used by Captain Woolbaugh, but for a while they weren't associated in business, but they were on friendly terms, and so that's a possibility. Also, the Captain Woolbaugh's son, Frank, was a photographer and was in business with his father, but died in the 1890s, so you'd almost have to know an exact age on the photograph to be able to tell that. We have some other things that have to do with the change of seasons.
Which shall I do first?
It really doesn't matter. We can take a look at some of the calendars that we have. It used to be that towards the end of the year, every business in town would send you a calendar, but the cost of them became prohibitive, and now you really have to fight to get a calendar. This is one that's, I think, particularly attractive. It's from Wright Buick, and many people who are watching will remember Forey Wright, who had a Buick dealership on College Street and later on East Street, and then on what is now called Wright Drive. And when he retired from business, his building, his garage, was purchased by the Board of Education and was used as automotive's classrooms. That was eventually torn down and made into a parking lot there behind Tony's racquetball shop and those other buildings there, and a Wright Drive was named in his honor. But this is from 52, and it's another unusual thing for people who collect calendars. Now, I only have these because they're from Wadsworth, but people who collect them for themselves would be impressed with this because it has January on it.
Oh.
A lot of them will have several of the months torn off.
A couple months torn off until people are too busy to tear
So if you have a complete one. Also, particularly with the early calendars, which had attractive pictures on them, at the end of the year, people would cut off the advertising portion and frame, mount the photograph. So, of course, the advertising portion, which is important to us and to collectors, is lost. This, you might mention, is a velour
that's what I was going to say. Velveteen or some kind of
and the bird that
wallpaper
is on here is done with real feathers.
Oh, you know, I didn't realize that at all. Yeah, three-dimensional. Oh, this is beautiful.
I have seen those in red background, green background, blue background, and kind of a yellowish gold background that I have.
This almost seems like the calendar that was made for a particular client who maybe bought...
Well, Mr. Wright was a very handsome man. And when he was selling cars in the 30s, he was likened to a movie star, very suave, very sophisticated, very good-looking man. And he was very popular with the ladies in town. So he would get the ladies into the dealership and talk them into a car. And, of course, they would be so taken with him that they'd go home and browbeat the husbands into buying cars. But he was very successful and just died just a few years ago, well past 90 years old.
That is a beautiful calendar. Oh, this one is, too.
Now, this one is the type that I mentioned. Someone might remove the photograph or the picture and mount it separately. This is from Campbell's Service Station and Garage, which was on the corner of Auble and Broad Streets. Okay. Now, if you picture the corner of Auble and Broad, this is from 1933, I should say, you'll say, well, that's where Bishop Oldsmobile is now. That was originally opened by Overholt and Yoder in 1925 as a car dealership in that building, and there were gas pumps out front. And that was operated as a garage, and Campbell's operated the service station part of it. Then Jim Rich, which is a very familiar name in Wadsworth, began a garage down underneath and back underneath that dealership, and then eventually took it over, and of course he was located there for many years. They sold Sunoco gas.
This is very pretty, and there's a lot of fire.
It's kind of shimmery.
Yeah, there's shimmery, something in here that has iridescent paint of some sort. And this is January on it also. Yes.
One unfortunate thing is, as good as the cameras here are, they can't always pick up all the detail that we can appreciate.
Right. And it almost seems like gold leaf here.
Now, oftentimes, businesses in town, I shouldn't say oftentimes, occasionally, they would sponsor church calendars. In this case, this is a Sacred Heart Church calendar from 1940, sponsored by J.B. Hilliard's and Son. Now, at this time, Hilliard Cox Mulaney sponsors calendars for churches also in town. In fact, our Methodist Church calendar has been sponsored for the last several years by Hilliard Cox Mulaney. But it marks, since it is a religious calendar, the pictures are different on each month for different religious observances, and of course all the different holy days are marked.
Right, this is a 1940 calendar. Let me just see the difference. You can get a shot
That
of
one is
it.
Jesus in the temple, and each month has a different representation.
Yeah, the color has really lasted beautifully.
It's really surprising.
Like holy cards, actually.
For some reason, people save calendars. You would think at the end of the year that would
Happy
they'd throw it away and get a new one, but for some reason a lot of them are saved, and it's fortunate for us. This is another familiar business name in town. This is from Clyde W. Weltzine, Carburetor and Ignition Service. Clyde Weltzine started on the south side of Broad Street. Well, actually, he'd been in business with Mr. Welty before that, but then moved into what had been the Wadsworth Garage, where Carburetor and Ignition, or C&I Auto Parts, as it's now called, operated by his daughter, Norabelle Hunter, on the same location. This is a calendar from 1957. January, I thought it was missing, but it's actually, I don't want to take it out because it's really fragile, but it's tucked up in there. They tore it off, but they put it up in there.
This is the kind of people you like. They saved it. I was looking at the back here. It has helpful hints for homemakers.
Well, and that's another thing that people could do at the end of the year. Also, they could keep that and turn it over. A lot of them, as you folded them over each month, they would have recipes on the back or other information that would be of interest. So they really encourage people to save them.
To save them, sure. And remember the name of the carburetor ignition company that they might need.
This is one that is of a very recent vintage. It's 1992. I haven't gotten a 93 yet. And this was given to me by Garland Kreitz, the owner of Kreitz Restaurant, on the corner of Water and Main Street in what we historically call the Vincent Block. Some people call it the Birkbeck Block. And they have a nice little restaurant, diner-type restaurant down there. And though it's a relatively small business, they still put out a really attractive calendar.
They sure do. And still has January on it.
Yeah, well, that was a brand new one that he had, and he was able to give me a few from past years that he had put away, and he gave those to add to the collections.
You know, when you're talking about the names of the specific blocks, you know, you were Birkbeck and which one came first? I mean, when I talk with you, usually the original house or the original name of that specific block is the one that you use to refer to. But is it just kind of different knowledge around town when people recognize?
Well, a lot of it depends on during what era you grew up. If you speak to an older person, they'll refer to it as the Vincent Block. It was built by the Vincent family. Earlier, I guess you'd say Grandpa Vincent had a saloon a little farther down on Main Street. And in fact, his grandson possesses a whiskey bottle that was printed with the grandfather's advertising on it. But then Richard Vincent built the block on the corner of Water and Main Street and operated that for a number of years. Then later, Barris Birkbeck, who was an automobile dealer and was later mayor of Wadsworth and at the time of his death was postmaster of Wadsworth, purchased that, and they had it was a divided store. You had a drugstore on one side and you had the restaurant or the diner part on the other, and Bob Fail had a soda-type drugstore in there also. So it was originally two different storerooms on that corner. Then they went through a few other owners, and now it is Kreitz Restaurant officially, but up in the pediment of the building it says the Vincent Block. So you could really, it depends on what
era you were from, or maybe where you spent more of your time.
Exactly. The age of the person also would sometimes be an indicator by what name they know it. The building where Accurate Office Supply is located, some people, if you were telling someone new to town, you'd probably say, well, go to the Accurate corner.
Right.
Those older of us in town, old people, would call it the right corner, though historically it's the Myers Block because it was built by the I.S. Myers Dry Goods Company of Akron, though they only occupied it a very short time. So it really depends on the age of the person as to what they'd...
Right. Well, you can talk to a different number of people and really not have any idea what block they're talking about.
Well, my mother always referred to it as the right block or the right building. And I was remarking on this to someone one day, and they said, that's nothing. My grandmother still calls it the Myers Block because she remembered shopping there at the turn of the century.
That's right.
That building was built in 1905. The one across from it where Picket Fence Floral is A lot of people would refer to it as the Brenneman Building.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
Because Glenn Brenneman had his business there for so long. But it was built by the Albrecht Grocery Company for their Acme store, Acme number 39, run by Denton Mosier at the end. And so officially that's the Albrecht block. The one where Bobby Guthrie is the Huntsberger block, though most people would call it the Ladrack Building.
Yeah, that's where my in-laws' era it must be.
About the only one that anyone would agree on is the Citizens Bank corner. And anyone who came here in probably the last 10 years doesn't know where that is. Anyway.
Hey, that makes it even more interesting, doesn't it? Okay, we digress. But
I hope we don't have a problem with glare, because these are under glass. These are thermometers. And you wouldn't really have to check one outside today to know it's a pretty pleasant day outside. This is from the Allen Hartzell Dibble Company, which will tell you it's after 1916 and before 1942, when Carr Dibble retired from the company. Probably in the 30s, I would guess. It has a nice pastoral scene there, mountains in the back, thermometer over on the side, and it's in a metal frame, and it's made for hanging on the wall.
Did they give these out too, like calendars? I would think it would be a little bit more expensive, though, than a calendar.
I don't know what their actual policy was, if they gave them to anybody.
Policy holders of more importance.
Right.
Yeah. This is really pretty. Still works, too.
That's another one from Allen Hartzell Dibble that we've shown on a previous program. It has a little stand on the back of it.
Let's see if...
So you can stand it up for a desk. And it has the thermometer over here. And this one also has a calendar. And you would pull out this tab on the right, which I won't do because I'll tear it for sure. This is 1943, incidentally. And then you could tear off the sheet and push it back in. Right.
How nice.
And it also is in a metal frame.
Okay, we'll go back to this one.
I have to look and see what it is. Oh, this is the Clark's Corners service station, which was operated by Mike Ernest, and it was up at the Clark's Corners area. And again, it has a very pretty little setting.
Now, I know where Clark's Corners is, but I know there's people who don't know where Clark's Corners is.
Well, if you go north of Wadsworth on 94, heading towards Sharon Center, you go through two curves, a curve to the left and a curve to the right, so that you're heading north again. And that's Clark's Corners.
Clark's Corners, okay.
There's a man named Larry Miller from Kent State. He's actually working in Talmadge, who is compiling a book of obscure and obsolete place names in the state of Ohio. And this was attempted some years ago and was not very complete. And so he's trying to make a more complete book. And when obsolete and obscure comes to mind, people call me. And so I've been working with him for the little areas around this. Now, if you look at some state maps, and some of the maps that you'd get from the gas station when gas stations still gave them out and didn't sell them for $1.50, you would see that Wadsworth was not listed on it, but Clark's Corners was.
Oh, you're kidding.
Even though Clark's Corners was not incorporated.
Yeah, incorporated or anything.
It wasn't an actual government. It was a designation.
That more people knew than Wadsworth.
Just like around this area, most of the ones he asked me about in his initial letter were from the western and northern part of the township. And I just have a passing acquaintance with those names, so I had to do some research. But he didn't ask anything around this area, so I wanted to be sure he included Clark's Corners and Custard Hook and Bigelow Chapel and some of these other Trump's Corners and some of these other places around here that are important in our history also. Well, you have to remember
Clark's Corners is the only one that I recognize out of the whole group.
You have to remember, too, that back in those days, and by those days I mean up until the 30s or 40s, there were not a lot of street names. These areas were not highly developed. And the only way you could give directions was, well, where John Smith lives.
Right.
Well, that became Smith's Corners.
I see.
And then maybe someone would open a little store there, and then maybe they'd get a post office if they were lucky. That's usually what you choose as the official name, is what the post office gave them.
Okay, I don't know if we've gotten this already on.
Yes.
We've got
don't know if you've gotten it.
Here.
And that has a thermometer but no calendar. Okay. This is one of a more recent vintage. It's John W. Gerbrick, Roofing and Spouting, and it has a thermometer over here to the side, and this is a lake scene. I guess if you're going to order roofing and spouting, you have to be a man. So you don't want to look at those farmhouses. You want to look at some dogs out there killing ducks.
That's right, hunting. When you were talking about Bigelow, well, where is that?
Bigelow Chapel, that was named for a minister or an itinerant pastor named Bigelow set up a chapel at the area where 261 of the Akron Road intersects with Medina Line Road. The chapel is long since gone. I couldn't even tell you where it was, but that's Bigelow Chapel.
I wonder how many people out there knew that. I hope.
I bet you a lot more than
I bet a lot more than I knew.
And if I make a mistake, they'll tell me. This one is also from Allen Hartzell Dibble. Now, it's got a mirror on it, so I don't know how well it might show up. But there's this says tailwind down here. And in light of the tail hook scandal that we experienced, I don't know if we should have shown this one, but you can see that there's a plane flying here, a military aircraft, and the ladies' skirts are being blown up, and there's what appears to be like a piece of luggage over to the side, and it has a thermometer on it. Oh. But that is also from Allen Hartzell Dibble. Probably around World War II.
Yeah, that's what I
would. There are two reasons I would say that. First of all, well, yes, exactly. We know, again, Carr Dibble joined Allen and Hartzell in 1916, left in 1942, so it has to be in that time period. The military aircraft would indicate something military was going on, and the fact that this is a wooden frame, it's painted a gold tone, but it's wooden. All the other ones we've looked at have been metal, and so we can assume that maybe metal was at a shortage during the war.
Plus her clothes look to me a kind of 30, 40-ish.
That one next.
Okay.
Now this one we've also shown before. This is the Wadsworth Savings and Trust. I said probably the only building everyone would agree on downtown would be Citizens Bank, but then someone else is saying, does he mean Bank One? The vacant Bank One building. It was built as the Wadsworth Savings and Trust Company in 1930. They were an outgrowth of the Wadsworth Bank, which was founded in 1873. The bank closed because of internal troubles. Read the book. Internal troubles in 1930. When it reopened, it was named the Citizens Bank and Trust Company. As we've mentioned on previous shows, when they developed the area along College Street, the south side of College Street, and Wautroosa Avenue, that whole area, they put Wautroosa Avenue through there, and they held a contest to name the street. And the winner of the contest turned out to be the vice president, Dr. Elf Walter Boyer, the mayor, the vice president of the First National Bank, their competitor, so he won the prize from them. But he made the word acronym from the letters in the title, W-A-S-A-T-R-U, kind of juxtaposed them, and came up with Wautroosa.
Oh, I can't believe that.
Not named for the famed Wautroosa Indians who once
lived there. I was waiting for the Wautroosa family to appear somewhere. Yes, well, you have tip on the Wautroosa.
Well, you have that with Wautroosa, and then you run into that with Rawega. People say, well, you had to have Indians there because you had the Rawegas out there. Instead of the Rittman and Wadsworth Incorporated Golfers Association. Or out towards Barberton, you have Camp Fermachuca, named for the Barberton First Methodist Church camp. So they're all acronyms made out of that. Now this one,
we all think they're Indian.
I doubt that we'll be able to see anything at all on camera of this one.
But we'll give it a try here.
You might be able to make out Fleet Wing up at the top, and you cannot at all, even close up, barely make out the writing, but it's the Nicodemus Oil Company. And the Nicodemus Oil Company produced, they piped oil on, I can't get the right word I want, but on Water Street, at 300 Water Street, adjacent to their home. And then they operated a service station on the corner of College Street and South Pardee, where that old dilapidated station is now. Oscar Nicodemus was a very prominent man here in town. He was on the Board of Education and served in many other capacities. This, I was attending an auction and saw it hanging in a garage at the auction. You can tell it's all weather-beaten. The paint's wearing away. Now, that can be professionally restored. There are people who are talented enough. Walt Neal in Wadsworth, the former cartoonist for the Beacon Journal, does that type of work on the side. And they're able to do that, but it's very costly. And I can't afford it, so that's why it looks like that.
I like to say, see here, phone looks like 99.
99. We'll be talking a little bit more about phones a little later. Now this one is really nice because it's from the First National Bank of Wadsworth, but besides them advertising, there are all sorts of other businesses around there. You have Les Green, who was for a long time with the engineering department of Wadsworth, plumbing and heating, Carl Shelley Plastering, oh gee, I can't see them all, McD Ford Motors, Lee's Incorporated, Paints and Wallpaper, of course, Hilliard's, the Tower Shell Station, J.L. Adamich Nursery, and of course Elsas Ben Franklin store down at the bottom, in Gerbrucks that we mentioned earlier, and Glenn Arnold, the contractor. So you've got a lot of advertising all on one thing.
This is kind of a timeline for you then, right? Because
Right.
you know what businesses were in existence approximately the same time here.
Well, a lot of times when I'm going through old newspapers or having conversations with people, I'll make notes, and then I reduce these to 3x5 cards. In theory, this is how it works. And file these all away, and every time I get new information on a business, I add it to that 3x5 card. So if someone calls and says, can you tell me about the ABC store, I don't have to go through 20 different books pulling together information. Hopefully, I can pull the drawer open, pull out the ABC store, and it's there. By the way, we did have an ABC store in Wadsworth.
I thought you just made that up.
Oh, I wouldn't do that.
Have we gone to the pictures or what next?
Yes. Oh, well, we've got a couple more
Okay,
things, couple more items down there. They're small ones. Just take a second.
Okay.
This is from Moomaw Brothers Shell Service Station. North of the Lutheran Church is the car wash.
This is dual purpose.
Yes, it's got a mirror on the back. It can sit on a desk and swivel. This is from 1957. And that was a Shell service station. That was the site of the old carriage factory that had been built in 1838. It was later reduced in size by half. Eventually it was closed. A part of that building was moved to the back of the lot, and the Shell service station was built there. And in 1957 it was operated by the Moomaws, and this is a little souvenir that they gave out.
It's kind of interesting to me how oftentimes the same property will be used for similar operations.
We didn't tend to destroy things back then as much as we do now. This is just a little souvenir. In fact, I use this in my bedroom to keep track of the temperature. It's from the Wadsworth Rotary Club. Some of these other older ones that we've shown, thermometers, have been subjected to so many variations in heat through the years. I don't know how accurate they are. But this is a digital one that I received from the Rotary Club, and it just shows how things evolved through the years.
That's right. So they're still getting these away. I wonder if that'll have a lasting... Well, you won't throw this away, I know.
Well, no, it does already. Now, if it didn't say Rotary Club on it, it would still be useful, and it would be nice to have.
That's true.
But the fact that it has their insignia on it makes it all the more special.
Well, and the guest speakers, they would know that you were the guest speaker.
Now, on another chilly day, down at Little Wadsworth, we've talked before about Little Wadsworth, the area on the Turkey Foot Lakes and the West Reservoir, where Dr. J.F. Detweiler had his fishing cottage that he called Angler's Villa. Now, Dr. Detweiler's father had made a fortune in the California gold rush selling supplies to the gold miners, and so even though Dr. Detweiler was educated as a physician, he never really had to practice. He kind of did it half and half on the side. His biggest enjoyment was buying a drugstore where the substation is now located on Main Street, and it was kind of a Cracker Barrel type of fair where everyone would gather and discuss the day's events. One man that I recall who told me about being treated by Dr. Detweiler, this was back before the turn of the century, I assume, and he needed some type of inoculation. And at that time they would take a piece of glass and they would make an X like you would for a snake bite and then pour the medicine into it. But Dr. Detweiler was a very popular person. As I mentioned when we looked at the pictures of the Broad Street in the snowstorm, his mansion was on the corner of the Marathon lot. He decided that he wanted to put on a minstrel show, some type of theatrical production to kind of liven up the town. Exactly. And there wasn't any place that was large enough to hold it. Nobody seemed too interested. So he said, I'll do it. And he had an opera house built where Mike's Body Shop is, or Tony's Body Shop is now. Approximately that location on the corner of Wright Drive was built in 39 working days and was finished in time to accommodate the minstrel show. That was in 1895. As I say, he had his little cottage down there at the Portage Lakes, and a lot of his friends decided that they would do the same thing because they wanted to have a vacation spot, but they didn't want to travel that far from their businesses. So they bought the old part of the old Schwartz farm and allotted it around the lake. They built cottages and lived along the lake almost as they lived in town, next door to one another, going up Highland Avenue. But this is a picture of a fishing expedition, and you can tell by the way they're dressed that it must be awfully cold at that time. Now, the young man on the corner, a young boy, I can't identify. I don't recognize him. The one next to him is W.A. Alt, who is an attorney. He was mayor of Wadsworth and was also postmaster. He laid the cornerstone for the Masonic Temple. shortly before his death in 1923, and believe it or not, was a very distinguished-looking man. Next to him is Harry Mills, who was Dr. Detweiler's brother-in-law, and Harry Mills was the father of Martha Mills Taggart, who will be remembered by many Wadsworth people. Next to him is C.O. Bachman, whose father, Seth Bachman, made a fortune in the horse trading business during the Civil War, and also found coal on his property at Silver Creek and became a coal baron, and was the first man in Wadsworth to have more than $100,000, which in those days, in the 1860s and 70s, would be like having millions and millions now. So C.O. Bachman was supposed to run a feed stable, but he was another one who really didn't have to do a whole lot. Next to him is George Yoder. And then in the back row is John Yoder, and next to him is Harvey Smith, who I've seen listed in other sources as Dr. Detweiler's brother-in-law, and that's not correct, because Dr. Detweiler had only one sister. Dr. Detweiler is next to him, dark cap, and next to him is Peter Yoder. Now you'll notice that that name Yoder creeps up quite a bit. And the Yoders were the founders of the Wadsworth Milling Company, which was just south of the tracks, and they were a very important family at the end of the 1800s and the beginning of this century. They were also early owners of the Wadsworth Salt Company, which operated down on State Street. And in 1911, in the beginning of 1911, when they decided to move their offices from rented rooms on College Street to their own facility, they built the brick building across from the ruins on State Street, up on the hill, which, as it was built, resembled more of a residence than it did as an office building. It has 2 large living rooms, it has stained glass windows, fireplaces, bookcases, and when that company went out of business, my grandfather purchased that and finished the remodeling into a residence, and it's now owned by Marshall McElroy. He purchased it from my grandmother a number of years ago. But the Yoders, something unusual that they did was that they built homes of similar design. Another of the Yoder brothers built a home on Highland Avenue that is now the home of Mike Smith, the recreation director from Wadsworth. It was long identified as the Bixler Funeral Home, but it was originally built by a member of the Yoder family. Another house in town built by that family was the one on the corner of Pine Street and Main Street, on the opposite corner from the Vincent block. And that was Benjamin Yoder's house. He doesn't happen to be in that photograph, but they all have similar architectural styles. Apparently, for some reason, they were influenced by that, and they're really about the only 3 or 4 examples in town of that style of architecture. While we're on that subject, there's now a business block in front of what we would call the Yoder House, the Ben Yoder House on that corner there. This was built in the 1950s. That house behind, the Yoder House, was occupied by the police family. They own that, and they built that 4-room business block there. 3, 4.
Someone can go by and check it themselves.
Now, on that corner, and Richard Police had his barber shop in there for many, many years. He was a barber in Wadsworth for 50 years. He'd originally traveled with bands and then went into the barbering business. His father had been a barber. His brothers, Charlie and Ray, were brothers. His brother Ray had a shop a little further down the street. And he retired from business in 1987 and just died here a few weeks ago after a long career in Wadsworth activities. And it's always sad when you see someone who's been a part of Wadsworth for so long to pass on. While we're on the subject again, unfortunately, earlier this month, death called Dallas Trent, the gentleman over here on the left. This is a picture of the Wadsworth City Band. I guess you could tell by that by the drum. And see what a great detective I am. This is taken in front of what we would now call the Center for Older Adults. At that time it was the Recreation Center. And the Wadsworth Band posed there. This was from a I'm sorry?
I was going to say, we didn't get the picture of which one was Dallas Trent.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dallas Trent is over here. Next to him is the band's mascot, his little daughter, Darlene.
Oh, Darlene, named after him, I imagine.
I would guess so. And I wish I could identify everybody, but there are too many people in the picture, and I just, off the top of my head, can't recognize everybody in the picture. But in any case, he passed away at an advanced age. I believe he was 87. I should know, but I believe he was 87. And so he was it was another loss to Wadsworth. Another part of our past is gone. Recently, at our home, and I assume at other homes in town, we received this in the mail from Realty One. What it is it says 1992 Wadsworth City Profile, and it lists information about who the town was named after. It does say date of incorporation 1931, which we know is not true. It was incorporated in 1866. It became a city in 1931, not the same thing. The location, population, comparing from 1980 to 1990 census, the makeup by race and ethnic origin of the population, the demographics, the age of the different people, income, housing, all sorts of different information on the economy down here, the percent in the labor force, male and female, civilian labor force, and so forth. On the back, we have, and I realize this is too small to read on the camera, but they have the names of the major employers, what type of business they're in, how many they employ, commercial building units, home building units, building permits, and then how many people are involved in agriculture or forestry, mining, construction, manufacturing, transport. They break it down to all the various types of occupations and how many people are engaged in that, the percentage of change. Then they also have information on education, tax structure, local taxes, a form of government, parks, and so forth. A lot of information on one little sheet of paper. And I guess, as Ed McMahon would say, everything you ever wanted to know about statistics in Wadsworth. But though that's very informative and helpful, it's not the first time it's done. This is the Wadsworth Occupational Survey in 1938, done by the Wadsworth City Board of Education in cooperation with the State Board of Vocational Education, Division of Trades and Industries. And this goes through the same way, if you want to.
Sure.
Again, I realize we can't really read all of that, but it goes through and has the same type of things where they would, now at this time, the total of all ages in 1938 of paint mixers in Wadsworth was 1. And he was in the age between 35 and 54. And they go through pattern makers, pressmen, foremen, puggers. That's one I should, I don't have any idea.
That's not muggers, is it?
No, I don't think. Steam shovel operators, there was 1. But they listed everybody in town, not by name, but by occupation. And again, the demographics. And then they went through and made certain recommendations as to how the vocational departments of the Wadsworth schools and how the community could better serve those people and how they could help people get into job areas where that type of work was needed. This one, stop on that, but we have that next picture.
Okay.
Along those same lines, this is a picture of Clyde Vorse, who was the manual arts, head of the manual arts department for the Wadsworth High School. He came in 1937, left at the time of the Second World War. The student on the left is Fred Gwynn. Now, at that time, this was right at the outbreak of the war, right as we're gearing up to go into World War II, and the federal government allocated money for schools to train people for various jobs that would be needed in war production. And so Mr. Vorse is showing Mr. Gwynn how to operate some type of a
machine.
Thank you.
Let's be specific here.
These technical terms escape me. And I can see all the retired people from the injector sitting back there saying, that moron, doesn't he know what that is?
Doesn't he know what this is?
I tell you, I walked through the injector once. Oh, I've been there many times, but when it was in operation, I walked through there once, and someone took me through. An employee had to lead me to where they were turning the big posts that hold up the roof of the gazebo. To me, it's a bandstand. Now everyone calls it a gazebo. Downtown. And they were so large that the only way that they could do them in one piece was to do them on the lathes at the injector. They were the only place large enough to do that. And Millard Freed came out of retirement to turn those. Anyway, they were taking me to that place in the injector, and we went down hallways and upstairs and around corners. And the next time I went in to take some photographs, the receptionist says, you know where they are. Says, yeah. you go by yourself. I said, no, I don't think so. But in any case, this was a government project that was supported through our Wadsworth City Schools to help young people get into defense industry at the time of the Second World War. Now, this happens to be the newspaper in which that picture that we just looked at appeared, the August 1st, 1940. I'm sorry, I didn't give the date, I guess. But the August 1st, 1940. It's the same paper that we just looked at. But something that's interesting to me, now that they've decided to combine our Wadsworth paper with the Norton paper, are the personal columns. And you can see they...
Right, so society and personals up here.
Right.
I pulled it away from the camera.
The personal columns run for several pages.
Yeah.
All sorts of information. Who had dinner with who did what where, and in those days going to Akron. But there's one that I thought might be of interest particularly to our viewers.
Shall I read this?
If you'd like to.
John Hanna, little son of Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Hanna, was a tonsillectomy patient at Wadsworth Hospital Monday morning.
And the last time I saw our mayor, he was recovering very well. But he was still eating a lot of ice cream. I noticed that. Well, now, one other thing along those same lines. You know that I was trying to find something that I wasn't able to find. I'd misplaced. So while I was trying to find that,
you found something better.
This. And this is just from the Cleveland Press, February 22nd, 1962, 31 years ago. And it has pictures of Wadsworth.
Oh, I haven't.
Around there. There's Jack Summer, who of course was our mayor at the time, Frank Huntsberger, who was Wadsworth's centenarian, the High Street Park, the city limits, First Assembly Church, the library, the businesses, and so forth, down through there, the proposed high school, and Don Merriman standing by his gas pumps, former mayor who had his gas pumps out by the street, Civic Center. But the reason I'm pointing this out is the headline. Can you read it?
Yeah, Wadsworth, a rich man's town, eyes industry.
Yes. So as soon as we leave here, we're going to go look for our pot of gold. They used to have, I don't know if it says it on this sign or not. No, it doesn't. But yes, it does. At the top of the Chamber of Commerce sign at the entry to town, it says the City of Perfect Living. That was Wadsworth's slogan at those days.
What was the date on that?
1962, February 22nd, 1962.
30 years too late, huh?
This is just one other thing. We can just go over it quickly because we're probably running long. This is just another brochure on interesting facts about the interesting city. Same type of thing we looked at with a survey with a lot of statistics in there, meant to encourage people to move to Wadsworth. This is probably from about 1950. If I had to have guessed, I would have said it was a little bit later, but they list the address of the Methodist Church. Well, it has to be later because the Overlook School's in there. It has to be closer to 57. But they have an incorrect address in there. That threw me off. But anyway, just another example of that. Now, just within the last month or so, most of us have received our new telephone directories for Wadsworth. And of course, it has the Akron portion in the back, or at least part of the Akron portion, which is a help to us. But a lot of people are irritated because the front part has Montrose and Copley, and you've got to go through all those other numbers. Well, things used to be a lot worse. For Wadsworth, the first telephone line was put through Wadsworth in 1880. And it went through College Street, and the only phone in town was at Brouse's Harness Shop on College Street. Finally, in 1893, the Wadsworth Electric Company was given a franchise by the city, or by the village at that time, to string electric lights through the community. But there was a provision that they could have that franchise for 25 years if, within 2 years, by 1895, they set up a telephone exchange. So in 1895, the Wadsworth Electric Company, which is also sometimes called the Home Telephone Company, set up an exchange for Wadsworth. This is the office building, which at that time was where the drive-through to the former Bank One is now on College Street. And these are the first three operators there. You have Daisy Miller Garrison, and Della Rickard Curry, and Gertrude Nicely Baker standing in front of their office. The office was later moved, it was sold in 1905 to the Star Telephone Company. The local shareholders sold out to the Star Telephone Company. The office was moved to another location on College Street, and then was moved to the top of the Albrecht block, above Accurate, where it remained until 1920, till they moved to the top of Captain Woolbaugh's building, which we would call Ann's Pastry Shop. And it stayed there until their building was built on North Lyman Street in the 1950s. And it's interesting because for a while they closed our Wadsworth telephone office. And if anyone needed to transact business, you had to go between Medina and Brunswick. And the reason they gave for closing it was that office rent was too expensive in Wadsworth. I said, but you own the building. Oh, we do? But in any case, we have a Wadsworth office now. Now from Star Telephone, it went to Northern Ohio Telephone. Now it is General Telephone, and we have a very helpful and responsive office operated there.
Okay.
We'll take the phones out, just a couple of other things. This is the Wadsworth City Directory, Village Directory, for 1896. And it was the first one. As I say, they had just begun the year before, 1895, with 60 subscribers. And this was the first one to list, somewhere, the telephone subscribers. And you can see a short listing. I know it's too small to read there. And then it goes on to the next page. And that's the extent of the Wadsworth Telephone Directory for 1896.
Is it clear on?
Now, the 1905 directory contained no numbers, nor did the 1913 directory. In fact, they barely even, in the 1905 directory, they mentioned the Wadsworth Electric Company and who the owners were, but they didn't even mention that they provided telephone service. Do I have something of importance in here or not?
Sure you do.
I don't know. No, that's all I was pointing out was the fact that in the 1905 directory, in the section
here it shows.
They gave the incorporation and the officers, but they did not list any of the numbers, nor did they even say that they were in the telephone business.
A small paragraph.
And the same is true of the 1913 directory. They just listed the names. The only exception is if a business had a telephone. They might do it in their individual advertising.
You had these bound, though, didn't you?
Those
didn't
last
come
two.
bound
No,
like
they
this.
didn't. They were paper bound.
Yeah, is this more or less the condition that you found them in?
Yes, I've got a couple that are in better condition. That one was broken, the front of it.
But
And
so you took the time and put the money into it to preserve this thing.
Right.
Kind of an example of what it really looked like in its original.
But now,
It came to you originally.
and then the 1938 was much better. We'll skip over that. But the reason that I'm mentioning this particularly is because I wanted to talk about some of the things that we've acquired here since we last met. And one of these is a gift that came to us from attorney Richard Dickey in Wadsworth, who had been a law partner for many years with the late attorney Merle Egan, and consequently had some of Mr. Egan's possessions. And Richard turned over to me a large number of directories, city directories, and most importantly, telephone directories. Now this one is from July 1929. You see the advertising for Good and Bixler Funeral Home and Furniture Store. And this is for the Seiler Hatchery at Ashland at the bottom. But at this time, when I mentioned earlier, we're upset if we have Montrose and Copley to contend with. You see there, they had Ashland, Burbank, Congress, Creston, Homerville, Jeromeville, Lakeville, Lodi, Loudonville, Polk, Red Haw, I don't know, Savannah, Seville, Wadsworth, and West Salem, all in the same book. This is a terrific find because though directories might be kept, phone books usually at the end of the year are thrown out because they're, especially now, because they're too big and cumbersome. There you see W.S. Bixler, of course, still one of our leading businesses. R. Trent and Sons, Taylor and Cleaners, there on Broad Street. Rybolt Furnaces, which was on Mill Street. But
the print was no bigger than they are now.
No, but they're in beautiful condition. And he didn't include them for every year, but there are a large number of them. And this will help to fill in the gaps. Because as we've talked before, we published a village directory in 1870, then they skipped 1894, then 96, 1905, 1913, then they jump all the way to 1926, 27. So this fills in a lot of gaps. Also, out of all these directories I had, I was unable to find a 1954 one. And our library in town has 6 or 8 of them, but they wouldn't sell me one. So I tried to find one at auctions and couldn't come up with one, and luckily one of those was in the box. So we're very grateful to Attorney Dickey for his help with that. And let's see, I think that's all we've got on that one.
Okay. Pictures now? Or some?
Oh, no, we can go to the pictures. We've talked before about Judge Frederick Brown being a settler in downtown Wadsworth. The histories say on the location of the library, actually it was further east of that, closer to Highland Avenue. But in any case, he was the first leading citizen in the downtown area. Another very distinguished man who moved to Wadsworth was Judge William Iles, who's seen here on the left. He was born in 1783 in Kent, Connecticut, and came to this area, to Ohio, in 1813 with his family. They had to cross through what was called the old Braddock Trail, named after General Braddock, who had blazed it. And they had a very difficult time. They were sick almost all the way. The family had 6 daughters and 1 son, according to the history. Actually, they had a 7th daughter who died en route, and they had to bury this child in the wilderness and go on. And one portion of the trail was very narrow, and they came up against several Conestoga wagons. Well, these Conestoga wagon drivers moved his wagon off to the side, to the woods, so that they could pass, and then left him there with his sick family. And he had quite a time trying to get the wagon back on track and to go on their way. To come from Connecticut to, they came to Palmyra, Ohio, over by Youngstown, and it took them 40 days on the trail. So if you know what it's like to travel in your car for an hour or two with a sick child, you can imagine having the entire family on the verge of death for 40 days in the wilderness. As I say, they did that in 1813. Then they moved on to the Akron area, and he had a farm just north of Summit Lake, which would now be about downtown Akron, but of course at that time it was a wilderness. And then in 1820 came and settled on the Akron Road at its intersection with Hartman Road, and those were the Iles farms. He and his wife, Polly Durthrick Iles, were Baptists, and they were members of the early Baptist church here, and when that church became the Disciples of Christ Church, now the First Christian, they were charter members of that organization. And in fact, the first district or area meetings held for that church were held in his barn because there was no area large enough for that. As I mentioned, he had 6 daughters that survived and 1 son. The 1 son was William Madison Iles, who was generally called Madison Iles. He inherited his father's property because he was the boy, and that's the way things are done.
We're done. Past tense.
Boy, I'm glad I got that pen away from you. And they were in turn passed on to his son, William N. Iles.
Okay,
now, if we want to go back to that other one just a minute, sorry to do this, but they're kind of hard to display. Of the 6 daughters, one of them, Clarinda, married Albert Hinsdale. And we've talked about the Hinsdales before. Clarinda Iles Hinsdale was very much interested in education and really insisted that her sons excel. And they were very prominent people in their fields of medicine and the law. One of her sisters married D.L. Harris. Another sister married Reuben Woods. Another sister, Evelyn, married Aaron Pardee.
Okay.
And that's an awful
Whip this
picture.
picture out here.
It's all broken up, but it's an awful picture. But that's Aaron Pardee, who was, of course, the first mayor of Wadsworth and was also a state legislator. I should have mentioned Judge Iles was also in the state legislature here and in Connecticut. I used to be able to say that word. And in Connecticut was also a judge of the Court of Common Pleas and very respected people. Now, another sister, we're down to one more sister, married James McGalliard, who at that time was also a very prominent citizen. Just at the end of last year, I was contacted by the McGalliard's descendant, a lady in her 90s, who had several family relics from the Iles family. And she said, no one in my family is interested in these things. They're all leading their own lives. And she said, will you take them off my hands? Well, of course, I was only too glad to do so. And we have some of those items here. I'll let you hold them.
Okay. This does look like a christening gown to me. I know we talked about this before the show.
Now, I was told that this was a christening gown, and it is of finer quality, and it has nice little lace around the top and sleeves that would lead you to believe it was more than just an everyday child's dress. However, as was pointed out to me, the disciples of Christ do not baptize infants. Now, whether or not the old-style Baptists did or not, or whether perhaps another denomination had married into the family, but this was an heirloom gown from the Isles family, and I was told it was a christening gown. And when the ladies would go to church on Sunday, at that time, there was a driveway that went right up before the front steps of the Disciple Church, which is now the First Christian, and the carriages would pull right up to a very high raised platform so the people wouldn't have to walk through the mud. And this is a lace mantilla that was worn by, and it's really unfortunate you can't see the detail work more clearly. But now these items are, I am told, around 200 years old. They've been in the family that long. And this is a shawl that matches the mantilla.
Was this for mourning, I wonder? It's on, because it's all black, I guess.
I have pictures of other ladies during that time who also wore black, so I don't know that it was necessarily for mourning. I was just told that they wore it to church. And when you have a 90-some-year-old woman who tells you something, you believe it.
That's true, yeah. And then what else?
We talked on a previous show about some families that we reunited here at the end of last summer in Wadsworth. And when these people came up from down south to meet with their long-lost relatives, they stopped by the house, and while they were at the house, Eleanor Burt is the name of the woman who so graciously gave these items to me. She stopped by the house, and she still drives, but for long distances, like Fairlawn to Wadsworth, she has a friend who takes her. And everyone in the house was just enchanted with her story. She's an absolutely delightful, charming woman. This is an Afghan that was made. Now, as I understand it, two of those sisters, the 6 sisters that I mentioned, competed in a contest at a fair to see who could make the finest Afghan. And unfortunately, the sister won the prize. But this is what comes down to us. And those colors are just as vibrant, and it has several different types of work on it. And I wish I knew more about that type of thing to be able to describe it properly. And again, I'm sure there are people watching who are hollering at their TV sets right now.
It's like a needlepoint here.
Let's see. And it's a very large thing. Very
Afghan.
Very large Afghan.
David, we have 3 minutes now. You're going to have to pick and choose your pictures.
All right. Well, let's go to the photo album real quickly.
Okay.
Excuse me.
All right.
At the end of 1990, we
That's where this is?
yes, announced with sadness the death of Mary Ellen Hawkins Alexis. And she was the last member of the Young family, the Youngs being the founders of the Ohio companies that brought wealth and prosperity to Wadsworth and its citizens. And through the generosity of her husband, Bill Alexis, I received a large number of photo albums. This is just one example. These are pictures that we've shown, large photographs, professional photographs before, of the Ohio Rosebuds. They were teams that played for the Ohio companies in the baseball league. The professional photographs are not as clear as these, and they don't have the names on them. And these are all named. The professional ones, there's sun in the players' faces, and consequently it's difficult for them to be identified, but the names are all on the back of these. But there are all sorts of albums and photographs and documents and things pertaining to the Anderson and Young families that were given to us, and so provide a lot of information. There are other albums like this that are being identified by people in town now.
So this helps you then, if you see a familiar face through all of these, you can double-check the name, find out when, where, how, and why. I think I made a mess here.
What was that?
We'll whip through these.
The Ford garage was located where the hardware store is now, on the corner of College Street and Wautroosa, named for the bank. It was replaced by a movie theater. The Ford garage, the Wadsworth Motor Company, replaced. This is the B.F. Sonnenstein mansion on the site of where Sherwin-Williams and Pizza Brothers are now, next to the post office. You can see how elaborate that is. Unfortunately, it fell into disrepair after the Sonnensteins died. It was in bad shape. It was moved around the corner in 1937 to become the Eagles Club, And the Wadsworth Motors Company built a new garage there on the corner. It was a beautiful Art Deco style building. They were there until they moved out east of town, out east of the high school here. Notice the stoplight up there with one little light on it. The reason I'm showing you this is because the post office is, they're raising, they're doing it.
Oh, they're doing it.
The two houses south of the Eagles Club are to be burned next Monday night on the 8th, and then this one, the large house, will be dismantled by the government. And in a plea to make people save everything, this is a dust cloth, Wadsworth Motors Incorporated, 153 Broad Street, when they were located there. Don't throw things out. Go through your attics. Go through your drawers. You people don't bring me anything.
Okay, well, and better off, you can also save this, but you don't have to keep it because you can give it to David.
Well, yeah, I'd feel a lot better about it. When I was talking about the Richard Police dying and the other things, I was taking pictures of the buildings that the post office is tearing down, and I was taking pictures around the South End area. I was walking down the street and found this laying on the sidewalk, torn in half. It's the bylaws of the Home Building and Loan Association of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, September 1938. Now, of course, it doesn't pertain to Wadsworth, but to someone in Lancaster Historical Society, it would be of importance. And perhaps after it's restored, it can be traded for something pertaining to Wadsworth. But someone threw it out because they didn't think it meant anything, did they? Things mean something. Save our history.
Save our history and send it to you. Well, thank you, David. You're coming back next month with another box of goodies. And thank you all for watching.
Pardon me.
For
Thank
David
you.
and for me. Thank you.